on Impact. Doctors and the human guinea pigs who say they were betrayed.
They were his patients, supposedly, but he doesn't know who they are. And they have no idea who he is.
Patients who claim they were betrayed in the billion-dollar world of drug research.
I really trusted these doctors, and I really feel they betrayed us.
Scientists accused of diverting millions and betraying patients. Next on Impact, CNN and Time on special assignment. With Bernard Shaw in Washington, D.C. and Stephen Frazier in Atlanta. Impact, a collaboration of two of the world's leading news organizations, CNN and Time. From Washington, D.C., here's Bernard Shaw.
Welcome to Impact. So many illnesses are taking a toll on us and our loved ones with no cure in sight. No miracle pill, no magic bullet. That's why so many patients, desperate for a cure, volunteered to test experimental drugs to become human guinea pigs. In return, they get free medicine and hope from doctors they trust. But in this Impact investigation, correspondent Art Harris reveals how that trust can be betrayed and how patients can become pawns in the high-stakes business of drug research.
Meet Dr. Richard Borison.
Sir, ma'am.
Former professor at the Medical College of Georgia. Highly respected for drug studies on the mentally ill. Among the top doctors in America.
Both suspects went mobile on them. Still looking for Dr. Borison.
Suddenly, Dr. Richard Borison is under arrest.
82 counts of theft by taken.
Dr. Borison, does this invalidate your research?
16 false statement counts.
Have you been involved in the theft of millions of dollars?
1 count of bribery.
Now, meet his partner, research psychologist Bruce Diamond, also arrested.
Mr. Diamond, are you involved in the theft of millions of dollars?
On Diamond, 1 count of practicing medicine without a license. 10 counts reckless conduct. 1 count of bribery.
Police searched their homes.
Did you guys find what you were looking for?
We found a lot.
Investigators for the state attorney general moved fast and froze millions of dollars in bank accounts, controlled by Borison and Diamond.
That's account. Okay. I just froze them.
And seized art, antiques, and pricey cars.
The trail we're following the money.
The next day, a bond hearing.
Come on out, gentlemen, and have a seat at the council table, please.
2 top scientists charged with diverting as much as $11 million from their school. They came under suspicion after employees confided in other doctors. Borison and Diamond declined to be interviewed by Impact. They insist they did nothing wrong.
Absolutely 100% not guilty.
But what at first looked like a simple case of theft has raised troubling questions about high-stakes drug research. Some doctors who do it, drug companies who pay them, and patients. So desperate, they're willing to try almost anything, even powerful experimental drugs. In the case of Borison and Diamond, many patients say they felt like human guinea pigs.
Make a tight fist for me, in and out.
Patients who came to them looking to cure Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression. Patients whose care sometimes turned out to be careless. Consider the case of this former patient of Borison and Diamond.
So the Burts.
I don't know what they is.
Janice and Louis Huckabee married 40 years ago, after Louis had served his country just after World War II. Back home, he repaired engines and worked in his garden.
Cabbage were his favorite, and the bigger they were, the better.
But Louis Huckabee no longer works with his hands. Alzheimer's disease has put him in a veterans hospital and his family in distress.
You don't know if he's going to recognize you. You don't know if he's going to tell you to get out.
At first, Janice Huckabee tried to take care of her husband at home, hoping for a miracle. Then she heard that Dr. Borison wanted volunteers to test a drug for Alzheimer's.
I thought it was an answer to prayers.
So Louis Huckabee became one of the many Borison and Diamond drug study patients. Unknown to them, they would be tended to by some employees with no previous medical training, like Christy Hernandez. She drew Huckabee's blood. That's not against state law, but she says that part of her job made her uncomfortable.
Honestly, I was terrified because I'm horrible with needles, and I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to do it.
So Hernandez practiced on a fake arm, but she says Diamond also had her practice on live patients who were schizophrenic.
But he said that if I missed, don't worry about it, just try again.
Since Hernandez drew blood from her husband, Janice Huckabee believed she was medically trained.
How would that make you feel now to know that Christy is not a nurse?
I'm flabbergasted because they told me she was a nurse.
Sources, including former employees, tell Impact Borison and Diamond routinely hired research assistants with little or no medical background.
In the protocol, it said that a nurse must administer the medication to the patients at every visit. And I'm obviously not a nurse, and I did it. I learned how to do an EKG maybe twice, and then I performed it on a patient. I did an EKG one time on a patient that had a pacemaker, and I had no idea how to do it.
Beyond poorly trained office workers doing medical procedures, this FDA report says patient charts show Dr. Borison meeting patients he never met. He's not required to in every case, but some families say they don't ever recall seeing Borison in the office. We asked Mrs. Huckabee to identify her husband's doctor from news footage. Janice, do you recognize this man?
Oh, that's one of the doctors.
Do you know which one?
I think that's Dr. Diamond.
Would you be surprised if I said that's Dr. Borison?
Well, I really didn't see him enough to know which one was which.
Former employees tell Impact Borison spent much of his time here, in his office as chairman of the medical school psychiatry department, just 1 block away from his private office, where volunteers got their experimental drugs.
Dr. Borison wouldn't know my patients if he ran into them on the street.
They were his patients?
They were his patients, supposedly, but he doesn't know who they are, and they have no idea who he is.
Janice Huckabee says she was told to call Borison's office if there was ever a problem, but she says she never heard from him when she needed him most, in a life-and-death crisis.
My husband had gotten hold of the guns, and he would not let go of them. And we sat out on the patio, for my son and me, for over 3 hours trying to get the guns away from him. He was going to kill a family member.
Like some other family members of drug study patients, Huckabee thought Borison's partner, Bruce Diamond, was a medical doctor.
I called, and Dr. Diamond told me that to give him 2 chlorohydrate, and he said that there was nothing that they could do, that we would have to see a private physician.
So Huckabee filled this prescription, signed by Dr. Borison, and had her husband take the pills.
It was a forged prescription.
A prescription allegedly forged by Diamond, a PhD, not a physician. In fact, the indictment says Diamond routinely forged prescriptions with Borison's name, for patients, for himself, for employees.
I know that Dr. Diamond forged prescriptions several times, once even for me.
And Borison may have even blessed the forgery. In this note to his attorney, Borison says there were, quote, perhaps a few cases where Bruce may have written prescriptions signing my name, with my knowledge and authorization. Beyond alleged prescription forgery, Christy Hernandez tells Impact patient care took a backseat to profit. She says one patient wound up in the emergency room, nauseous and vomiting, possible symptoms of a bad reaction to the experimental drugs, a reaction that should have raised questions about using him further as a test subject.
Did you suggest to Dr. Diamond, look, this guy's really sick, I think we should take him off? Or...
Yes, and he said, wait another week and we'll see what happens.
About a week later, Hernandez says, the patient came in for his next regular appointment, but there was no doctor there.
And when he came into our office, he had just taken the last dosage that morning, and he got violently ill, and I got very scared, so I called the ambulance.
Hernandez says neither Borison nor Diamond visited the patient in the hospital, and says they got mad at her for calling the ambulance.
They were upset because they had to pay for it, but they were happy that he was okay.
Former Georgia Attorney General Mike Bowers, who ran the investigation, says money, not medicine, was the bottom line.
I would advise anyone who has a loved one involved in this sort of activity to monitor it closely.
Consider the victim, says Bowers. Unwitting patients with debilitating conditions, victims of Alzheimer's, depression, schizophrenia. In this case, he says, everyone lost, from the patients desperate for a cure to a medical college out millions of dollars in research grants, allegedly pocketed by Borison and Diamond. When we come back, we'll tell you how those who are supposed to protect often desperate human test subjects can't always be counted on to do the job.
As we've just seen, patients can put themselves at risk when they volunteer to test promising drugs awaiting approval. Part 2 of our impact investigation shows how the system that's supposed to protect these volunteers is set up to fail. Once again, Art Harris.
Dr. Richard Borison, under arrest for allegedly diverting millions of dollars in drug research money.
Are you concerned about the results of the drug studies?
A month before his arrest, Impact videotaped Borison moving out of his office at the Medical College in Augusta, Georgia. And moments later, unloading just around the corner at Biotech Park. Here, unknown to the medical school, he'd set up his own drug research firms, along with his partner, Bruce Diamond.
Have you put patients at risk?
A tale of two professors. One, the former head of the psychiatry department. The other, a PhD in pharmacology. As early as 1985, state records show, they began to set up their own for-profit research labs. That's allowed as long as the college is told. But the school says it was kept in the dark.
You know, I don't think we had any clues that something was going on.
Psychiatry Chairman's office.
The partners allegedly made millions off drug research by heavily recruiting drug study patients for their private lab. The drug companies paid the two men up to $30,000 per patient volunteer. The companies stood to make billions if their experimental drugs were approved. State prosecutors say Borison and Diamond gave the impression to drug companies and patients that their private lab was part of the medical school.
It was Biotech Park, but they told us that it was part of the medical college.
But Biotech Park is not part of the medical college. Yet sources tell Impact this is where drug companies sent millions of dollars in research fees, much of which they thought was going to the school right across the street.
30 or maybe 40, 50 on that.
What's more, investigators say, Borison and Diamond cut their own costs by illegally using school equipment and school employees in their private companies.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
Professor George Schuster chairs the college's Institutional Review Board, or IRB.
I have no trouble with it. Okay.
At every university that does research, committees like this one are supposed to protect human subjects by reviewing ongoing research.
You didn't know that he was using university medical employees to do his private work?
No,
Should you have known that?
not necessarily.
How is that possible? Schuster says if you can't trust your own doctors, who can you trust? In one memo to Schuster, Borison requests termination of a study, claiming no human subjects at the medical college were enrolled in this project.
It turns out that apparently there were some subjects that were enrolled in that.
In fact, investigators tell Impact the partners were allegedly skimming these research patients, diverting them from the medical school to their own lab, along with huge fees from drug companies.
When they tell us that a drug study was discontinued because there were no patients, we accept that at face value.
As it turns out, to monitor drug studies, the oversight board at the college relies solely on paperwork submitted by researchers themselves, researchers like Borison and Diamond.
We are not a police function per se.
When Borison and Diamond set up their private companies, they could no longer use the college review board to approve research. So they came here,
Western IRB, Karen speaking.
across the country, to a private review board in Olympia, Washington, 3,000 miles away from Augusta, Georgia, and the psychiatric patients it was supposed to protect.
We recommend withdrawal of approval of an investigator's research.
Beginning in 1991, Borison and Diamond asked the Western Review Board to oversee 31 drug studies using volunteer patients. Every study was approved.
Our whole focus is protection of the individual patient who is participating in that study.
So you started having cough a while back, I understand, and then it got worse this fall?
Dr. Angela Bowen owns the review board, which, unlike most, actually sends investigators to check up on drug studies in progress and the patient's well-being. But in the Georgia case, her Western Review Board never did sound an alarm about what state investigators call years of alleged fraud and patient neglect.
Oh, I think the patient care was fine.
Senator John Glenn is concerned long-distance review boards may fail to protect drug study patients.
Anytime a person or a researcher puts in a request to an IRB that's a long ways away from where the research is going to be performed, it should be looked at very, very carefully.
Glenn got the General Accounting Office to investigate the review boards. Its report raised serious concerns about protecting human subjects. It found, in some cases, IRBs spend only 1 or 2 minutes of review per study. It said review boards' continuing reviews are typically superficial or not done at all.
The animals get more protection by the law, in some respects, than humans do.
That's why Senator Glenn is pushing for tougher laws to ensure the safety of human test subjects and hold review boards accountable for shoddy reviews.
Up to now, there's been very little or no penalty for IRBs that did not adequately monitor what they were supposed to be monitoring. This would put some teeth into the law and force them to do that.
But the review boards are just one of the guardians expected to protect human test subjects. Watching the watchdog is the Food and Drug Administration. It also has to bless an experimental drug as safe before it can be sold to the public. So, why does the FDA have so much trouble detecting medical fraud across the country?
Fraud is hard to catch. When you have very intelligent people working hard to hide something from somebody.
According to the GAO report, one reason it's so hard to protect human subjects is the FDA does not inspect all drug studies. Another reason, the FDA only conducts routine on-site inspections after all clinical trials have concluded.
Usually we tend to do those after the fact when the marketing application has come in and we say, okay, let's take a look at this study.
The GAO report says FDA procedures, like after-the-fact inspections, may permit human subjects to go unprotected. In one case, a Borison and Diamond drug study patient attempted suicide. And the indictment against them claims the researchers tried to bribe an employee to cover it up. Borison and Diamond deny any wrongdoing. But this FDA report, issued after they resigned from the medical college, says some patients should never have been in their studies. It also says Bruce Diamond did work he was unqualified to do, and that medical complications suffered by patients went unreported for months.
Doctors falsify records. They may falsify informed consent forms. They may put people in clinical trials when the people aren't eligible to be in the clinical trial. The good news is the system of checks and balances and inspections and multiple levels of oversight seems to be working to keep it at a fairly low rate.
One more watchdog is supposed to be the drug company. It not only pays for research, but stands to make billions if its drug is okayed by the FDA. Impact called several companies who paid Borison and Diamond to test their drugs, but none would talk on the record. Even the watchdogs feel the pressure of the marketplace.
The new drugs that are coming along are rushing to market. They put more pressure on investigators to recruit patients more quickly.
Those drug company investigators apparently never did detect anything amiss, such as Borison and Diamond allegedly AWOL from the lab.
The only time that Dr. Borison really came into our office is when we had monitors come from the pharmaceutical companies.
Most of the time, the doctors were not there. I really trusted these doctors, and I really feel they betrayed us.
But the Huckabahs are not alone.
This is the tip of the iceberg, because there are literally thousands, tens of thousands of mentally disabled patients. These kind of experiments are conducted upon them every day in this country.
He's okay, all righty? We're going to take him back in just a little bit. You better go get your stuff and have your picnic.
Many experts see desperate psychiatric patients as little more than unprotected lab rats.
So at the moment, who is in charge of ensuring human safety in these drug experiments?
Nobody really. You have to depend on faith that from the investigator to IRB to the FDA, somehow all of them work together and ensure safety, but they have no mechanism really to do it.
Human guinea pigs without a guardian, test subjects at risk, a system without a safety net. Experts say what happened in Georgia could happen anywhere.
The FDA is under increasing pressure to get new drugs into the marketplace even faster. That means an increasing demand for human guinea pigs to test them. Impact will be right back.
Next.
Coming up.
I like the money.
These two doctors made a fortune.
$2.28 million. That's healthy.
One of them was even building a castle. It was going to have a moat at the expense of their patients.
Do you have anything to say to your patients?
They almost got away with it. Next.
Excited bargain hunters packed the hall in Augusta, Georgia last December.
Sold $800 number.
For one of the weirdest auctions of all time.
Lot number 225 is all the swords and daggers and hatchets.
This is totally bizarre.
On the block, everything from antiques and paintings to suits of armor.
It's the one in the box.
Worth a fortune.
2,000, 2,100, 21, 2, 2, 2, 2.
It all belonged to the town's most famous and infamous doctors.
40, 130 bid, 140.
Richard Borison and Bruce Diamond.
280.
They no longer need this old stuff.
$270.
It doesn't work with their new decor. Pharmacologist Bruce Diamond, a Ph.D., convicted on 53 counts, including practicing medicine without a license and prescription fraud.
I like the money. It was almost like an addiction to see how much you can make. It was just a game.
Over 8 years, he and his partner, psychiatrist Dr. Borison, raked in more than $11 million, turning human drug trials into their personal money machine.
It grew up to a few $100,000, then it grew into millions.
They pretended to be doing trials for the Medical College of Georgia, where they both were on staff. But they kept payments meant for the college for themselves.
Did you do it, doctor? Do you have anything to say to your patients?
And in the process, they deceived some of the top drug companies in the country, to say nothing of the patients they put at risk. But still, how could they possibly make $11 million? Easy. Drug companies pay doctors enormous amounts to do drug trials, sometimes as much as $20,000 per patient in a study. It's a system that invites corruption.
I know that a lot of doctors are getting into it, probably ones that aren't even competent in doing research.
Just for the money.
Right. Just for the money.
140, 140, 140, now 50, now 60, now 70, 170.
Bill Hatcher said he had to come to the auction just to see how they'd spent it all.
Now 75, now 4, now 25.
Marion, Hatcher's wife of 52 years, was in one of the doctor's trials.
No shaking.
She has Alzheimer's.
When you discover that your wife or your spouse or your loved one has this disease, then you become very, very desperate. I love you.
That's when Hatcher saw an ad for Alzheimer's patients to test an experimental drug designed to slow the disease.
And it was your understanding from the very beginning that this study was being supervised by the Medical College of Georgia?
No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, it was plainly in the paper.
The lie was even caught on tape. In video, the clinic shot to record Marion's progress.
Do you know where we are and what we're for?
What you call
The Medical College of Georgia?
And Hatcher says, though these trials involved powerful drugs, no doctor oversaw Marion's care, and she was getting worse. So where was Dr. Borison?
I met Dr. Borison the day I withdrew my wife from the program, which was 1.5 years later.
You didn't meet the guy who was supposedly...
Never saw him.
Happy birthday to you.
Janice Huckabee never saw Dr. Borison either.
Whoa, now.
Her husband, Louis, also was in the Alzheimer's study. One day, he became violent and psychotic.
He got a gun and was sitting out on the patio, and he was going to blow the brains out of a family member.
Panicked, she called the clinic.
Dr. Diamond is the one who was there.
But Dr. Diamond's not a medical doctor.
That's true. Dr. Diamond wrote a prescription for my husband and signed it.
Did you know at the time that Dr. Diamond was a PhD but not a medical doctor?
Nope.
And Bruce Diamond, PhD, wasn't correcting anyone's impression. After all, of the staffers who saw patients, he did have the best credentials.
Do you have a medical background?
I do not.
Angela Toohey was just 2 years out of college.
You were dosing patients?
Well, I guess it sounds worse than how I saw it at the time.
But she was the research coordinator, in charge of depressed and schizophrenic patients.
I determined whether they needed to go up a dose or stay at that dose, if they needed to go back. Looking back, I just think, who did I think I was that I could do that kind of thing?
She tried explaining her concerns to the doctors.
Dr. Diamond said, we don't care how these patients are doing. We want to know how many patients you recruited in the past week.
Dr. Diamond says he remembers no such thing, but he doesn't deny that volume was key to keeping the money rolling in.
$75,000.
$75,000.
$160,000.
$160,000.
It came in so fast, Prosecutor David McLaughlin says that Dr. Borison had trouble dealing with it all.
And we talked to the tellers, and he would come through the drive-thru, and he would deposit.
Through the drive-thru?
Through the drive-thru, and deposit 6 or 7 multi-$1,000 checks every day.
Now, what is this? $2.28 million, present balance.
Checking account.
That's healthy. I didn't know banks would take checking accounts of $2 million.
Banks love checking accounts that are this big.
It took a hefty chunk of the drug money to buy all the antiques, art, and armor. But the doctor had big plans. Dr. Borison clearly felt a man's home should be his castle, and a castle was exactly what he had in mind. This is the architect's model of the 11,000 square foot castle that he planned to build just outside Augusta.
This is Borison's pride and joy, and this castle was going to have medieval pennants hanging from it.
Meeting room.
It was going to have chandeliers hanging from turrets.
Trophy room.
It was going to have a moat.
Elevator.
And it might have been built
like a cathedral.
But for Angela Toohey,
now 70, now 80, now 90, now 30,
desperately worried that patients were at risk, she blew the whistle. But if she hadn't,
they probably could have gotten away with it.
But how did they get away with it as long as they did? Who is watching doctors to be sure that drug trials are run properly and that patients are protected? The short answer is no one.
A lot of people are going to be hearing about the study you did.
George Grobe is the Deputy Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Does this system give the patient any safeguards?
Yeah, if the doctor's not acting in good faith, I'd say the patient's at risk.
The supposed watchdog in the system is what's called the Institutional Review Board. Independent organizations set up to approve and oversee drug trials. But they often oversee just on paper.
I think it's probably one of the crucial weaknesses of the current system.
There is no requirement for any hands-on inspection.
I mean, if you want to know, do they come out and visit us once in 10 years?
Once in 10 years?
Yes.
These are the people that are supposedly monitoring this.
They monitor us quarterly by paperwork.
Oh, great.
About the only thing to discourage a doctor bent on fraud may be what happens if you get caught. Dr. Borison, the mastermind, is serving 15 years in a maximum security prison. He refused to speak to us. Dr. Diamond is serving 5 years, and it's apparently changed him.
I'd like to say at this point that who's ever watching and whoever I hurt in this process, I'm sorry for that. Last 14 months in prison, I've been repenting. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm really sorry.